Welcome to this explainer. I'm Dr. Elena, and today we're embarking on a pretty fascinating journey through the actual building blocks of how we evaluate language learning. We are going to be unpacking the Glossary of Language Assessment, specifically pages 87 to 94, from the 2024 book Assessment for Language Teaching by Ekpak T. and Constant Leung. Now, alphabetical glossaries can be incredibly dense, right? So we're going to transform this A to Z list of terminology into a highly structured conceptual mini lecture. And to help ground these dense theories in reality, I'll be sharing questions from two of my favorite educators that I mentor, Wei, a postgraduate TESOL student, and Sarah, an early career language teacher. Together, we are going to completely demystify these terms. All right, before we get into the weeds of the vocabulary, I want to frame our entire discussion around three big takeaways from Ekpak and Luong's work. First, assessment isn't just one monolithic thing. It spans multiple paradigms from evaluating past learning to actively supporting future learning. Second, when we talk about the quality of a test, its validity and reliability, we have to remember that these are highly contextual targets, not absolute guarantees. And finally, assessment isn't just a classroom activity. It has profound social dimensions and incredibly real-world impacts on our students' lives. So keep these three pillars in mind as we go. So here is our roadmap for today. We've taken that glossary and reorganized it into four really digestible thematic buckets: core paradigms and literacy, theories of quality, classroom practices, and finally, social dimensions and impacts. Our first stop is Section 1, Core Paradigms and Literacy. Let's get right into the foundations of assessment. We have to start with the ultimate goal, which is language assessment literacy, or LAL. Simply put, this is your conceptual understanding and working knowledge of assessments. But what's truly interesting here is the application part. It's not just about knowing what a test is. It's about knowing exactly how to use that tool to improve teaching, to support learning, and to make fair, informed decisions about your students. Developing your LAL is literally what separates a mechanical test administrator from a truly responsive, empowering educator. Just the other day in our seminar, Wei, our postgraduate TESOL student, asked for a crystal clear distinction between summative and formative goals, and I pointed him right to these two concepts. Assessment of learning, or AOL, is what we traditionally think of as summative. It evaluates the volume and quality of what a student has already attained. Think of your classic final exams. Contrast that with assessment for learning, or AFL. This is formative. These are teacher-led activities embedded directly into your daily teaching. The whole goal is to identify where a student is currently at and provide immediate support to improve their ongoing language acquisition. Now, when we evaluate those assessments, we also have to decide on our overarching grading philosophy. A norm-referenced approach actually ranks students against each other. It assumes a bell curve and is typically used to select candidates for limited spots, like university admissions. A criterion-referenced approach, however, is a totally different ballgame. It evaluates a student's performance against a predetermined set of standards, completely regardless of how their peers performed. So if everyone meets the criteria, everyone gets top marks. Moving right along to Section 2, Theories of Quality. This is where we look at the technical, psychometric metrics that make an assessment trustworthy. Measuring the invisible? Wei brought up another fantastic critical point here. He basically asked, Dr. Elena, how do we know a test score actually reflects a student's true ability? It's the million-dollar question, isn't it? How do we accurately measure these complex invisible structures of the mind? To answer Wei, we turn to classical test theory. According to this theory, every single score you observe on a test is actually a combination of two things. First, the true score, which is the actual underlying ability we are trying to measure, plus an error of measurement. And listen, error isn't necessarily a mistake in your grading. It represents totally random factors. It could be tricky test techniques, bad lighting in the room, or even just the student having a terrible cold that day. A score is almost never a perfect reflection of ability. Error is always going to be part of the equation. Because of that inevitable error, we lean heavily on two foundational quality metrics: validity and reliability. Validity asks the big question: are we measuring the right thing? Does the test actually evaluate the specific language construct it claims to, or is it accidentally measuring something else, like a student's test-taking strategy? Reliability, on the other hand, asks, are we measuring it consistently? If a student took that exact same test tomorrow, or if a totally different teacher graded it, would the result be the same? As we noted in our big takeaways, these are contextual targets you constantly strive for. They aren't magical guarantees. This brought Way to another really profound critical reflection. He asked if the rigid uniformity of standardization inherently ignores bias against marginalized student groups, students who might lack certain resources or cultural familiarity with the test content. And this brilliantly illustrates a core tension in our field. Standardization is designed precisely to create fairness, right? It adheres strictly to the same procedures, the same timing, and the same rubrics for every single student. However, as the glossary points out, bias can absolutely still creep in. Bias happens when features of the assessment inadvertently offer an advantage to some groups while adversely affecting others. A perfectly standardized reading test about a highly culturally specific topic, like a local sporting event, might seriously disadvantage a brilliantly fluent student who just simply lacks that specific cultural context. We have to impartially recognize that standard procedures do not automatically erase systemic inequalities. Okay, Section 3, Classroom Practices. Theory is great, but how does all this look when you're actually teaching? Let's apply it. To really ground this, Sarah, an early career teacher, presented a highly practical scenario. She asked, how do I actually apply these psychometric concepts when I'm sitting down to design an end-of-term writing task for my incredibly diverse multilingual classroom? My immediate advice to Sarah was that she must first clearly define her construct. A construct is an abstract concept that we hypothesize exists in the brain, but we can't observe it directly. You can't visually see grammatical knowledge or pragmatic competence. You can only observe the behavior it produces, like writing an essay. So before you write a single test prompt, you absolutely must explicitly define exactly which construct you are trying to capture. Sarah then asked a great follow-up. How can she support her learners during the task itself, rather than just waiting until the very end to hand out a grade? I introduced her to dynamic assessment. This is a beautiful three-step cycle. First, you assess the student's current capacity as they attempt a task. Second, you step in and provide tailored, immediate guidance to support their progress right then and there. Third, this process fosters the student's ability to become a more independent, self-regulated learner over time. It literally merges teaching and assessment into one fluid interaction. Way then chimed in with a very practical concern about the end of Sarah's project. How on earth do you grade subjective writing fairly? The answer is rater moderation. First, you must base your evaluations on clearly defined scoring rubrics. Then, you perform your checks. Inter-rater reliability means making sure you are consistent with yourself. Are you grading the last paper in the stack as strictly as the first one? Inter-rater reliability means checking consistency between different teachers. Would Sarah and I give the exact same essay the exact same grade? This rigorous process is exactly how we tame subjectivity. Finally, we look beyond the four walls of the classroom to our fourth section, social dimensions and impacts. Assessments hold immense power. The social dimensions refer to the educational and political functions of tests. Let's be real. They are often the gatekeepers that allow or limit access to institutions, to jobs, and to visas. And because these stakes are so incredibly high, they create what we call washback. Washback is the direct influence an assessment has on daily classroom instruction. Think about it. If a high-stakes national exam only tests multiple-choice grammar, teachers will inevitably spend most of their time teaching multiple-choice grammar strategies, often at the complete expense of authentic speaking skills. Connecting this back to her own classroom, Sarah noted how crucial it is to mitigate these intense pressures for students who might be at a systemic disadvantage. This brings us right to accommodations. These are absolutely necessary alterations to assessment procedures, like giving extended time or modifying the format, that allows students with special educational needs or disabilities to participate fully. Accommodations aren't about giving an unfair advantage at all. They are about removing barriers so the student can show their true potential. It effectively reduces that error of measurement we talked about earlier. And that brings us to our final reflections on assessment literacy. We've taken quite a conceptual journey through Ekpakiti and Lung's glossary today. Let's quickly revisit those three big takeaways we started with. We've seen how terms like formative and summative really showcase that assessment spans multiple paradigms. We explored classical test theory and bias, proving that quality, validity, and reliability are highly contextual targets you have to work for. And finally, through concepts like washback and accommodations, we cemented the fact that assessment has profound, life-altering social dimensions. Truly understanding how all these terms interconnect is the bedrock of real assessment literacy. I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to ponder, much like the ones Way and Sarah grappled with today. If assessment is a tool for social and educational power, how will you use your assessment literacy to empower your learners rather than limit them? The terminology we learned today isn't just dry academic jargon. It's the vocabulary of fair and transformative education. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this sparks a whole new level of curiosity in your own assessment practices.